All right. So again, you can follow Dr. Elaine on Twitter. That's at Ensoesie. And as well, if you're not following Data Science Nigeria just yet, please go ahead and follow Data Science Nigeria on Twitter. And again, of course, we are Data Science Nigeria. We have a vision to raise 1 million AI talent in 10 years. I'm sure very many of us on this webinar today already know this about us. All right. And a very big congratulations to the guys who won the free data yesterday. I'm very sure you guys are already enjoying it. And today again, you can still win. We'll be giving out 20 gig worth of data to 10 lucky winners. And what do you have to do? Be attentive in the class. We're going to be having questions towards the end of the class. And then if you answer the questions right, hooray, you have 2 gig of data to yourself. All right. Our speaker is well known. I believe everybody here already know who the speaker today is. That's Dr. Elaine. She's going to continue from where she paused yesterday. And I believe it's going to be a fantastic session. All right. Thank you very much. Dr. Elaine, over to you.
I need to be made host or co-host. All right, I still can't screen share. All right, great, thank you.
How about now? Can you now?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Great. Hi, everyone. So we're going to continue our conversation that we started yesterday. So these are contact details, just to show you that again. You can check out redhair.org. You can also email if you have questions or if you're working on a project and need help in terms of reviewing and feedback. Send an email to redhair.org@gmail.com. And as we already mentioned, I'm on Twitter if you're on Twitter as well. So again, Redhair is focused on providing tools and resources that you need for writing. So please use those tools. They're available on the website. We usually have workshops like the one that we're currently having, but we usually do it in person. But because of Corona, we're doing things now online. We have a blog, check it out. I think some of the articles that we have there are going to be very useful for you, and we're going to continue updating as we have new articles written. We also have a mentoring program. The first iteration of the program ran for 8 weeks, and it included one-on-one mentoring. We also had group mentoring sessions, and you get to receive feedback on your manuscript. So if you're working on a paper for a conference or for a journal, you can get one-on-one feedback on your manuscript. So yesterday we talked about writing, scientific writing. Specifically, we talked about sentences and paragraphs. Today we're going to go into how to write an introduction, materials and methods, results, and the discussion section. So just a review from yesterday. When you're writing a scientific paper, here's some of the things that you need to think about. So good scientific writing has to be clear. So avoid unnecessary detail, only say the things that you believe are important for your audience to learn about your project. It should be simple. So the purpose of a paper is not to show that you have a large vocabulary. You want to use words that enable people to understand what your project is about. So the goal is to communicate. So always remember that the purpose of writing a paper is to communicate. So if you're using words that people have to keep going back to the dictionary every 2 minutes to look up, it's not very effective and people will lose interest in your paper. So write in a simple way so that people can understand what you're talking about. Also, when you write, avoid making assumptions on proven statements. Always back things with data. If you've done analysis, use your data to support the conclusions that you're drawing. Structure your writing logically, so that when someone is reading, they can follow your ideas and your processes easily. Also, make sure that information you're presenting is accurate, be as precise as possible, and try to avoid things like approximately, almost, about. Just state what you're trying to state. Your writing should also be objective, so your statements and ideas should be supported by evidence, both coming from your own work, but also coming from other people's work as well. So we talked about sentences. When you write a sentence, you want to make sure that it's expressing a complete thought and that it contains both a subject and a predicate. And we went through some examples of sentences, how to write, break sentences up, how to combine sentences. And avoid using fragments in your writing. Fragments can be useful sometimes, but not in scientific papers, at least not in conference or journal papers. If you're writing for a magazine, there are times when you can use fragments to emphasize certain points. We also talked about paragraphs and how to structure your paragraph. So a paragraph should have a topic sentence, that's your main point or your main idea. And then it should have a body. So the body of your paragraph should contain all the extra information that supports your topic. And then you should also have a closing. And your closing sentence can summarize the paragraph. It can remind your readers of the topic, or it can link the paragraph to the next one. And you can also do all of those things at the same time. So let's go into writing the scientific paper. When you start writing a paper, you should always understand that there are differences in different fields. So someone who writes who is a psychologist will probably write a paper differently than someone who is a computer scientist. So you should pay attention to the language and how papers are structured and organized in your field. So this is why I kept talking yesterday about reading in your field. So read what other people are writing in your field so you can see how people organize things and what language they use when they explain different things. So there are certain terms that are used in multiple fields, but they have different meanings. So always think about how other people have used those terms, how they're defined in your field when you write a paper. Again, lots of reading, critical thinking, and hard work. And I just want to emphasize critical thinking a little bit more. So critical thinking is defined as objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. So when you read a paper, whether it's your paper or someone else's, you should always be asking questions. And here's some of the questions that you can ask. What assumptions are the authors making? Is the data representative of the population? So for example, if someone is writing a paper about South Africa and they say, based on our data, we've concluded that there are no inequalities in South Africa. Everyone has access to the same resources. It doesn't matter if the person has a PhD or what their credentials are. You should be able to ask questions like, what is the evidence? How did you arrive at the conclusions that you're currently presenting? What is the data? How did you collect your data? How did you analyze your data? Who is included in the study? Who is excluded in the study? So all of these questions determine the conclusions that people draw from the analysis. And these are questions that you should also be asking. So when you're working on your paper, you should be asking these questions. Where is the data coming from? Because when we do analysis, we always make assumptions. If you're working on developing a diagnostic tool, for example, and you're processing images using convolutional neural networks, you make assumptions about those images. You're assuming that the images are correct, that they are not falsified. You're assuming that the images are the images that you should be using in developing the tool. All of those assumptions play a role in the conclusions that you draw. So when you read a paper, also think about what assumptions are the authors making. Some authors will clearly state what the assumptions are. Some authors will not state what the assumptions are, but you can see what the assumptions are based on how they treat the data, how they analyze the data, and what conclusions they draw from the data. And so this is what it means to think critically about things. So don't just take a paper because it's been published and assume that the paper is 100% correct. You should be able to question the data and the analysis and the conclusions that are being drawn in the paper. So for our first exercise today, I want you to come up with other questions that you can ask while reading a research paper and share this on the chat. What is the justification of the study? What contribution has it made to knowledge? Was it published in a reputable journal? Yes. So there are lots of not very reliable journals out there. They're just out to get money. So that's a very good question to ask. Who are the target population? What's the benefit of the research to the reading community and the end users? Is the work reproducible? Yes, that's a good one. What method of analysis is used? What year was it published? That's a good question as well. So these are all very good questions. A lot about data, about significance, about reproducibility, unit of analysis, statement of the problem, assumptions, statistical assumptions, sample size, year of publication. So these are all questions that are important to ask. Year of publication is definitely important. It's important in terms of how quickly your field is advancing, and it can help you think about what has changed in the field. But if you're focused specifically on the content, then you should be asking questions about sample sizes. References are also important. Someone just brought that up, yes. What are the references that are included in the paper? Who's being referenced? Great. So these are all very good questions that you guys are asking. And this leads to the next topic, which is a literature review. So these are questions that you should be asking when you're doing your literature review. You want to define your topic clearly at the start. Make it as simple as possible, because then that will help you find studies that fit into that topic. Use multiple platforms to find papers. You can use, if you're in public health, you can use PubMed, Google Scholar, Scientific African, and other resources that are available out there. Search and research. This basically means that the first time you do your search, you're probably going to miss some things. So go back and redo your search again. So someone just mentioned ResearchGate, so that's another good one. Go back and redo your search again to make sure that you've covered everything that you can possibly cover. Also, make notes about the search. So when did you do your initial search, right? Write the date, write the time, how many articles did you find, write those, how many articles did you choose to include. This all matters because websites get updated, things get updated over time. And so the articles that you might have seen in the past might not be there in the future, or additional articles might have been added. So then if you're doing a new search, you can search from the last time that you did your search to the current time period. Always take notes while reading. This helps you a lot if you have to go back and review things. So if you're reading a paper and you've made very good notes about that paper, you don't have to go back and reread that paper again. You can just look at your notes when you're writing your literature review. Keep your review focused, I've mentioned this, and be critical and consistent. So let's go into writing the introduction. So the purpose of the introduction is to provide sufficient background information. So when your reader is reading your paper, they shouldn't have to go to other places to find the background information. Your paper, your introduction or your background should be sufficient enough for them to understand why this study should exist. So as I mentioned, it should indicate the reason for the study. You should state briefly and clearly the purpose in writing the paper. So why is this paper important? What contributions is this paper making to the field? What is the changes? What questions are you asking? Why are the questions are you asking important? So here are some simple rules to think about when you're writing your introduction. So clearly state the problem to be investigated. Review pertinent literature to orient the reader. So the reader should be able to know what has been done in the past or what has not been done in the past and why your study is filling a gap. State the major contribution of the paper and how it differs from previously published studies. So if your study is new, why is it needed? What have other people done and why is yours different? So sometimes you might be working on a study and someone else publishes a similar study at the same time. It doesn't mean that your study is not relevant. You should explain why your study is different from the other person's. Maybe they're using different methods. Maybe they're using a different data set. Maybe the way they're asking the questions are different from yours, or maybe the analysis you're doing is more in-depth than your analysis. You can explain all of that. So just because someone is doing something similar doesn't mean you have to give up on your study. You should state the major results, but this depends on the journal and on the conference. So some journals and some conferences will ask you to state major results, others will tell you not to. They will tell you to end your introduction with what the aims of the study are, and then move on to the next section. So this is one of the papers that I gave you yesterday. And in this study, we use deep learning to examine the association between the environment and obesity prevalence in the US. So this is the first paragraph of the study. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to read that and then tell me in the chat what you notice. Also think about some of the things we talked about yesterday in terms of how to organize information in a paragraph. And I think we discussed this paragraph yesterday as well. So feel free in the chat to state what you notice. What are some things that stick out to you? So someone has observed that obesity is a connecting phrase. It's a good point. Obesity is also the main topic of the paper. It gives verified statistics of obesity. Yes. Obese. Yep. The introduction started from a general perspective and was gradually narrowed down. That's a good point. So that's one of the points we discussed yesterday, starting from a broad perspective and then going down to the specific. Yep, yeah. So a lot of you are repeating the same points, so that's good. Yeah, so we try to mix some of the things that I talked to you yesterday about, where we start from stating what the big problem is, and then coming down to the US specific, and then listing references. So if you look at this first paragraph, it starts talking a little bit about what we understand about behavior and environment and health. So I'm going to go to the next paragraph in the paper. So this is the next paragraph. So what do you notice in this paragraph and how does it relate to the previous one? So it highlights studies that have been done in the past. So this is part of our literature review. So some people were asking about these numbers in brackets yesterday. So those are the references. So you can see that we looked at a lot of different studies. So 8 to 26 are the references that we're referencing basically in the single sentence. So this sentence basically summarizes several studies that have come to the same conclusion. And then the rest of the paragraph is also highlighting other studies in the same area and linking back to where we ended in the previous paragraph. So in the previous paragraph, we ended by saying that the built environment can influence health through the availability of resources such as housing, activity, and creation of spaces and measures of community design. And then we build on studies and the built environment. So notice we talk about the built environment again here, linking back to the previous paragraph. So this is the third paragraph in the introduction. What do you notice in this one? Yep, that's a good one. So the use of the transition phrase. So we're saying, despite all the evidence we presented in the previous paragraph, yes, you're aware the knowledge gaps exist. Yep, so we state the knowledge gaps. Yeah, good points, good points. So you guys are all noticing very similar things, so that's good. So we start by saying that even though we have all this knowledge, there's still gaps, and here's where the gaps exist. And here are some other issues that we should think about that also make this study more important. All right, I'm gonna move on to the next slide. So this is the fourth slide in the fourth paragraph in the introduction. So what do you notice in this paragraph? Yep, contributions, that's a good one, yep. We do use the active voice. How do we solve the problem? Yeah. We talk a little bit about methods. And one of the reasons why we compared another study here is because one of my colleagues had published a study right before we published ours using Google Street View data, and we were using Google satellite images. And so it was important for us to, first of all, acknowledge that your study exists. You can't just pretend that someone else has not published on this, and then say why our study is different from theirs and why we think that our study is better. We also talk a little bit more about how our approach can be useful and how our data is publicly or openly available, and our computational tools are also publicly available for people to use. And our work can also be compared and reproduced for people who are interested in doing that. Great. So that's basically the end of the introduction. All your introductions are now going to be the same. So this is just an example for you to see how I tend to write introductions. If you look at some of the computer science papers, they probably have different backgrounds and the way information is structured is different. But the main thing you should think about is what should be included. So what is the information that should be included? The problem statement should be included. What are you trying to investigate? What literature already exists? So make sure that if someone is reading this paper, they have an idea of what other people have done in the field, and they're not just going in like you're the first person to do this. And you should also state the contribution of the paper and how it differs from other studies. So what have other people done in the past, and why is this so unique? Why should this study even exist? All right, so I'm going to move into the materials and methods. So the purpose of the materials and methods section is to provide enough detail that someone who is competent in your field can repeat the experiments, can repeat the analysis, can repeat the methods. So if someone reads your paper, they should be able to see, okay, this person did 1, 2, 3, 4, and I can reproduce the same thing. This is not always true for most scientific papers. So you've probably read papers where you tried to reproduce it and it didn't work. We did the same. So for the paper that I just showed you, there was another paper that was published before that, and we tried to reproduce the methods and we couldn't reproduce the methods. And the code was available on GitHub. We took your GitHub code, we tried to run the code, it didn't run. And so this is always a problem, or this is sometimes a problem in scientific publishing, in that it's really hard to reproduce what other people have done. But it's something that's important. If we want to further science, we should think about ways to present work that other people can reproduce. So not all of you are going to be working with materials, but if you're working with materials and you're doing like a biology experiment, or you're working in biochemistry or other fields where you're using materials, or public health, you should include exact technical details, including quantities and units of measurement. If you're working with animals and plants, you should identify those in your studies. If you're using humans, so if you're working with humans and you're including humans in your study, you should explain how those people were selected, how those people were informed about how their information will be used, and if there's any potential harm to those individuals. So in the US, they have what is called an institutional review board, and this is a group that would review your study and approve it to say, okay, the benefit of this study significantly outweighs the potential harms of the study. And I think there are the similar groups in other countries that also would look at your study and give you feedback before you can move on with that study. And even if your group doesn't exist where you are, it's something that you should think about personally. What are some of the harm that my study can cause to the populations that I'm studying? So if you're developing a device for a particular population in a community that maybe could be harmed if their information exposed, that's something that you should be thinking about. So as we've discussed previously, you want to present your methods chronologically. Use subheadings, so don't put everything compact in one place and make it difficult to read. Use subheadings so people know how you're moving from one step or one stage to another. Be precise, as I also mentioned previously. State method of investigation and reason for selecting methods. So this is important if you're working in a field where there's so many methods that you can use for analysis. So why did you choose to use a CNN or instead of using another method? Why did you choose to do regression analysis instead of using another approach? So these are things that you should explain. You don't have to write 10 sentences about it. You can just explain a few words. Maybe you selected it because someone else had used another study, or maybe you selected it because you compared several different methods and you decided that the method that you want to present is the best performing one. You should state that. If you're using ordinary statistics, there's no need for you to overstate that. So these are things like simple statistical tests like t-test, ANOVA. There's no need for you to overstate that because it's well known. So if you're doing anything in your field that is widely accepted and widely known, you don't need to overstate those methods. Always add references and additional details for advanced or unusual statistical methods. If you're using a method and there's a paper that has been written about that method, there is no harm in referencing that paper. So just go ahead and reference the paper. If you have, so some journals will actually ask you to move a lot of your methods to the appendix or the supplementary material. So they will ask you to only explain what is necessary for a reader to understand, but if you have equations and math formulas that you want to write, go write them in the supplementary material. So people who are interested will read that additional information, but the rest of the audience who might not be interested in knowing what the equation is will read what is available in the main manuscript. So just to go through a few examples. So in this paper, we looked at how we could monitor foods that were making people sick using internet data. So we wanted to compare what people were reporting online to what we were getting from the US Centers for Disease Control. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to read this and tell me what your initial thoughts are in terms of what we've talked about for methods. What if you have a method of formuling paper that is unpublished? Is it okay to use to refer that paper? That's a good question, and that depends on the journal. So some journals are okay with you referencing preprint papers or referencing reports and things like that. Other journals do not really allow that, but I think more journals we have been taught being able to reference materials that have not been published in journals or conference proceedings. So some of the things that people are noticing in this paragraph: the source of data, the data. What else? References, yes. So we're writing the methods, so yeah, you can include references. And also notice that the reference style is different. So different journals have different reference styles, even in public health. So the first paper we discussed had square brackets where the references were put. Here you actually have an author name and year. That's another good question. Is there a particular reason why we typed out 15 and did not write 15? That's also journal preferences. So when you write your paper at the end of, before your paper gets published, some journals they basically edit your paper before it goes to publication. So that's the proof stage. They would go in and change words to what they want it to look like. So instead of 15, they might spell out 15 instead of writing out 15. Great. So a lot of people have noticed that the data source is explained, the date of the data is explained. That's something very important. So what year is your data coming from? Because we want to know how old the data set is, and if there's new data set that might change the conclusions. Also, additional details about your data is always useful. So this is the next paragraph. Is this the next paragraph? Well, this is the next subsection. I don't remember if it's the next paragraph. And one of the things that you can notice is that we're using subheadings in this case. So there are some questions coming in. Are we expected to use the same referencing styles throughout? Yes. So if you start with one referencing style in a paper, you should use the same referencing style for the entire paper. Can you present the data sources in tabular form? If you have multiple data sources and maybe 10 data sources, you put them in tabular form. But if you have 1 or 2 or 3 data sources, you should just explain what they are. But it's always important for you to, even if you put it in tabular form, you should still maybe in the supplementary material say that these are the data sources, and here's what the data sources, yeah, where they're coming from, and here's what they contain. What should be the contents in the table of the, what should be the content in the problem of the statement when writing a thesis? It should be the same. Whether you're writing a thesis or you're writing a paper, your problem statement should state what the problem is. What are you trying to solve? Or what question are you trying to answer? The abstract is coming later in the discussion. Someone is asking about the abstract. So, all right, I'm gonna move on to the next, unless, wait, we haven't talked about this one. So what do people notice for this paragraph? So I would say hold your questions to the end. If I keep answering questions, we're never gonna get to the end. So keep your questions for the end. You can put them in the question and answer forum or whatever it's called. And then at the end, we will talk about all those questions. Yeah, so yes, here again, we're talking about some of the analysis that we want to do. And we're talking about the first step of the analysis, which we constructed a set of a keyword list and then mashed that to parse out our data. And then we talk about some of the other things that we're doing in our analysis. Thank you. So someone just stated that, steps taken during the methodology process. Great job. So this is the next subheading within the analysis section. It's called classification criteria. So again, I'm going to give you a minute to read through that, and then we'll keep moving on. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. So the main reason for showing you these examples is just so that you can review some of the things we've talked about. So we talk, for each step, we state what we did, and it follows logically. So if someone wanted to reproduce, or chronologically, someone wanted to reproduce this, they can go back and see that we first of all did keyword matching, and then we came to classification. And we're using subheadings to also help people follow through our analysis process. Inclusion criteria, so that's a good one, yep. We do state what our inclusion criteria is, or are. And then what kind of data do we extract? And then this is the next step in the analysis. So we did bias and cluster analysis, which basically follows from the previous step. And then we talk a little bit why we did some of that. So Yelp has a process for eliminating such reviews. We therefore focus on identifying bias introduced by individuals to a large number of negative reviews. So the idea here is that people write reviews online. Some people write reviews because they want to get, because it's something they're trying to get either from the restaurant or from the platform. And so the review might not be true. And so we wanted to do an extra set of analysis to see if there were lots of people who were writing negative reviews and had lots of reviews that they written in the platform. So here's another example. Great, so someone just said one can easily reproduce a study. I've learned a new idea. That's good. So the idea is always to present your study in a way that people can follow those steps and reproduce it. So here's another example, similar idea, but this time we're looking at Amazon reviews. So most of you probably know about Amazon. And so people buy products from Amazon website and then they write reviews about those products. And we wanted to see, could we get the information that people are posting online to track products that are making people sick? Again, we started in a similar way to what we did in the other study. We talked about the data. So what is included in the data? the years of the data, so year 2012 to 2017, where the data is coming from. It's coming from Amazon. We also got data from the FDA as well. So we had two data sources. So that's easy to explain. You just describe what the data sources are. So semicolon is used to separate the references. So all of this is depending, when it comes to references, it's always dependent on the journal. So different journals have different styles and you have to stick to their styles, or different conferences will use different ways for references and you have to stick to those formats. And then again, we continue with data gathering. But something that I wanted you to note is that this paragraph starts with our first project aim. And so we had two project aims. So it was important for us to say what we did to accomplish the first aim, and then what we did to accomplish the second aim. So if someone was reading this paper, they can see our first aim was just data processing. And that took up 80 to 90% of our time. So we had to say, this was the first aim, and here's how we accomplished it. Sometimes this information is not necessary in the methods if it's more of a result, but because our result was more of the second aim, most of what we did for the first aim was described under the method section. And so this is what I was trying to mention. So when we went into the data processing analysis step, we mentioned that that was our second aim. So after we've done all the data, getting the data from the platforms, organizing the data, cleaning the data, then we can start analyzing the data. So our second aim was to analyze that data. And then we described some of the methods that we used in analysis. So the 28-year matrix factorization should have been a reference. So that's a typo. So does anyone have questions specific for these sections? So finally, we went through our steps. So the topic of the paper was identifying unsafe food products. But before we actually got to identifying unsafe food products, there's so much that we had to do with our data. So how do you differentiate study aims and objectives? They're usually synonymous in most cases. So what you're trying to accomplish, those are your aims, your objectives, or your objectives could be the same thing, but it could also be bigger than that. It could be further than just your aims. So you might want to accomplish, I'm trying to think of a good example, but you want to accomplish A, but A can lead to B, where that would be your further objective. So is there a platform you can get data on a particular field? I don't know. So I don't think there are platforms that have been put together to just collect data for a particular field. So it depends on the question that you're trying to ask. So if you're doing like genomic stuff, there's GenBank, where you can get data that people have used in genomic studies. But I don't think it's that way for most other topics that you want to study. How do you identify the gaps in the study? That's a good question. So that's one of the things that's why I talked about critical thinking. So when you get a paper, you should be asking questions about that paper. What is the data source? What are the assumptions that are made in the study? Is the data comprehensive? Is it capturing everyone that should be included in that study? What is being left out? So the more you ask these questions over time, you begin to notice that not all papers answer, you can answer yes to all of those questions for some papers, and then you start identifying what the gaps are in some studies. All right, I'm gonna so move some of these questions to Q&A so we can move on. Wait, did someone just have a question about this example? No example of the several machine learning classification was stated. We applied several machine learning classification methods. So if you read the rest of the paragraph, you would see that there are several machine learning classification methods that are stated, not only in this paragraph, but in other paragraphs after this as well. So let's go to writing the results. We actually don't have too much time, so let's keep moving. I'll try to answer the questions I can answer here. And if I don't answer your question, please feel free to put in the Q&A. So when you write your results, you want to state your findings clearly and succinctly. So if someone is reading your study, they should understand exactly what you found. Don't make your results too long if it doesn't need to be long. If your findings are very specific, just state what they are. And then if you want to discuss a lot more about those studies, you can put in the discussion. But in some fields, results and discussions get lumped together. So you talk about what your findings are and then discuss why the study's findings are relevant. So it doesn't always have to be separate. One thing that is not advised, especially in my field, is not to state methods in your results section. So people prefer for your methods to be separate from your results. In other fields, that's not always the case. In some fields, you have methods being discussed in the results section. You have them, going together at the same time. So always check out what is relevant in your field when you're writing your paper. So choose what you present very carefully. You could have lots of findings. Maybe you've conducted 100 experiments, thousands of experiments, and have all these findings. You don't need to discuss every single one of those. You can create summaries of your findings. So you present the mean or the median. You can present standard deviations. You could present confidence intervals. Think about what you want to present. You can also visualize your results to summarize them. So think about ways in which you can use visualizations to summarize your results. Tables are useful, but if a table gets too big, it gets difficult for people to read. So think about when you want to use the table and when you don't want to use the table. Again, you always have to look at your journal guidelines or your conference guidelines because they're going to be different. Do not repeat information that you have in tables or figures. So if you've already summarized your results in your tables or your figures, you don't need to restate the same results in the text. You can just reference to the table and highlight the main points that you want people to remember. Think about being very precise when you write your results. So they should be short and sweet. Use statistics, as I've mentioned, to create summaries. So one thing you can do, if you can't remember all of these things that we talked about, you can always create a checklist. So when you're writing a paper, you can ask yourself those questions like, do I keep repeating information that I've already stated in tables or figures? Are my results specific? Do I state exactly what I want to state, or am I providing unnecessary information? Have I summarized my results in a way that's easy for someone to read and that is easy for someone to read and understand? And remember that your results are basically the most important part of your paper. So if your results are not well written or they're not easy for people to understand, then your paper basically falls because of that. So think about how to present your results. You could have done a lot of analysis that's taking you months or years, but if you cannot write the results from that analysis for someone to understand why your paper is important, then your paper is basically useless. So you should think about, how do I present my result in a way that someone can read, understand it, and see the value in my project. So just give you another quick example. So for this study, we wanted to look at influenza epidemics in China, and we looked at what people were searching for. So the particular keywords that people search for during influenza epidemics that could tell us how those epidemics are spreading in China. So this, I think this is one of the shortest results sections I've probably written, but this is what the first paragraph looks like. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to read and put in comments, questions in the chat. Oh, sorry. So we present correlations, yeah. So that was our initial step of analysis, to look at correlations between different terms. So we focus on stating what we've observed from our analysis. We don't try to explain much of what we've seen. We just say this is what we've seen, and this is what our data looks like. And not our data, yes, what our results from our analysis are. And we also reference tables. So instead of saying, stating everything that's in the table, we say see table 2 or see table 3 and see figure 1 for additional information. All right, so going to the next paragraph. It's very similar. So this is actually 2 paragraphs, not just one. It's very similar to what we stated before. So in this case, we talk about a model, and we also reference where the model is. So if you go to the paper and you look for model 2, you find the model that we're referencing. We indicate statistical significance in our results. We, what else do we do? We talk about tests that we ran and the results of those tests. And then in the last paragraph, we talk about additional analysis that we did for predictions and what our percent error was in our models. So again, this is just stating the results. There's no discussion. And one other thing I just wanted to note is that at the end, we say see tables S1 and S2. So S1 are the supplementary material tables. So we had additional information, but instead of putting that information in the text, we put it in the supplementary materials. So the supplementary materials for people that are interested in learning more about the paper. So maybe they want to reproduce the paper. Maybe they want to learn more about the methods, then they can look at the supplementary material. But if someone just wants to know what the paper is about, what are the aims, what are the results, then they can just read the main paper without going to the supplementary material. So this is things that you should think about. What is the information that you want to present? And what is the extra information that could be useful, but is not really needed if someone wants to just read your paper to see what you've done. So it's not necessary. So the discussion, again, some fields people combine the results and the discussion and they don't do them separately. But in my field, we do the discussion separately. And the discussion is usually the hardest section to write because it's not always clear what to put in it. It's not always clear how long you want it to be. But the thing I tend to think about is, how can I place my result in context? So what are my results and how do I place them in the context of what other people have done and where I think the field should be moving forward? So most discussions that you see are probably too long. If you start going more than 2 pages, then it's probably too long. And you want to come back and think about what is necessary. It's always what is important. So if someone is reading your discussion, what should they know? What are the important elements that you want them to remember? So some simple rules to think about when you're writing your discussion is don't be shy. Discuss the significance of your work. Always important. So you've done all this analysis, you've spent so many hours doing this work. Why is the work important? This is something that you should know before you even started doing the work. So state the significance of the results that you found. Maybe your results are different from what you had expected to see, but that doesn't mean it's not significant. You should still discuss why it is significant. Discuss your findings. You don't need to copy and paste what you've stated in the results, but discuss what your findings are, and then point out exceptions in your findings. So did you find something that other people have not found in other studies? Did you find something that is different from what is considered the norm in the study? You should point out those exceptions and discuss them. And that leads to the next point, which is how does your results agree or disagree with previous studies? So in what places are you finding things that are new or things that people have seen already? Clearly state your conclusions and provide evidence to support each conclusion. So you shouldn't just take conclusions that did not come from the results that you've observed. Your conclusions should be based on the evidence that you've generated. So let's go into one more example. So in this case, we're doing, again, looking at influenza. We're trying to model influenza. Instead of looking at what people are searching online, we're looking at what clinicians are searching online. So using clinician supported platforms. So I'm gonna give you a couple minutes to read this and write any things that you observe. Yep, we use a lot of active words. Yep, there's an abbreviation being used there. That's a good point. We do emphasize the significance of the study. We discussed a limitation of a model, but that's not our model. So we're comparing our model to another one. I don't think we're starting to discuss our model's limitations yet, but that's important for you to definitely discuss model limitations. And so we do use jargon, and then we try to define what that means in this case. So it's not that you don't have to use jargon or technical terms, but if you use those, make sure that the people who are reading this will understand what it means. Just justification and comparison of results. Yeah, so there was already a method that was developed by Google, and that was the standard in the field. And so we wanted to show that our method was better than what already existed. All right. So this is the next paragraph. Let me see. Okay. So this is the next paragraph, which also reiterates why our study is the way it is and why it's important. And then talks a little bit about the need for future research. That's something that you should talk about when you write your papers. Don't just end where you are. Think about what happens after that. So you've done all this analysis, you've made all these observations. What can you do in the future? What new things can you do in the future that you've not done yet or others have not done. Also, think about your limitations, and this goes with your assumptions. So what assumptions are you making about your data? What assumptions are you making in your models? And this happens especially if you're doing any kind of modeling, there's so many assumptions that go into that. You should think about those and discuss those in your limitations, because if those assumptions are changed, maybe your findings will change as well. And finally, the conclusion, sorry. So we conclude based on what we have observed. So in this study, we demonstrate that search queries from up-to-date database in conjunction with a dynamic multivariate methodology can be successfully utilized to obtain real-time estimates of influenza incidence in the United States before the release of official reports. So your conclusions should be based on what you've observed, based on what you've done. So based on all of these things that we've done, yeah, are the conclusions that we make. So et al, someone's asking what does ET and AL means. That basically means that there are additional people on the paper. All right, people have been asking about abstract, so we're going to end with a discussion of the abstract. So the abstract is basically what you use to sell your paper. So if you're writing a paper, you should think about, how do I make my abstract in a way that if someone reads it, then they want to read my paper. If your abstract is really bad, that could keep people from reading your paper. So this is similar to your abstract and title are things that you should think about. People don't always think about this, but your title matters. The title that you choose for your paper should communicate what the paper is about. So if someone sees that title, they understand that if someone is looking for something in your field, they should be able to find your paper based on the title. Similarly, when you write your abstract, you should think about what you're communicating in the abstract. Is the information clear enough such that if someone reads it, they know what the study is about? So here are the things that you should be thinking about. The main objectives of the study. Those should be clearly stated. Why the study was done, including any model organisms used, if that's relevant for you. Briefly state the keywords without including too much, the method, sorry, without including too much detail. So usually abstracts have a limit. So some abstracts for some papers are as short as 50 words. So that forces you to think about what words to include. What sentences do you want to include? What do you want to highlight in the paper? Some of them are longer. They could be up to 350 words or 500 words. So that gives you more space to put in more information, but you still have to think about what information is important to include so that when someone reads your abstract, then they know what the paper is about. So summarize the most important results and your significance. So some journals will allow you to include citations in your abstract, but most of them do not. One thing to always think about also is to avoid abbreviations, unless if you're going to define what those terms mean. There's no need for you to include abbreviations in your abstract. So that's all I have today. I think we went through, all of this material we usually go through like 6-7 hours in a day, and I just went through that in like an hour. So I am going to start looking at questions and discuss any things that people have raised. So I'm going to go to the question and answer. So someone wrote about whether the methods are reproducible. Yeah, so that's a very good question to ask whenever you're reading someone else's paper, but also when you're working in your paper. Why do most studies not provide access to the data used for their studies? So I cannot answer that question. Different people have different reasons. For some people, the data is obtained from the data might be sensitive, and so they can't share it. So they're using hospital data, maybe they can't share it. For some people, it's owned by a company and the company doesn't want to share that data. So there's several different reasons why people choose not to share their data, but I think more people are moving towards sharing data. Is it nice to write your abstract before completing the study? I think it's better to write your abstract at the end of the study. That's how I do it, because you have all the information that you need. If you write, you can start drafting your abstract before you complete your study, but things can change in your study, or you might not have the full picture. You don't have all the results. So writing your abstract at the beginning means that you won't have all the details that you need to include in your abstract. How do you choose keywords for your paper or your abstract? Your keywords should be based on what your study is about. Some platforms like PubMed have what are called mesh keywords. So those are keywords that are easy to find or have already been attached to specific subjects. So you can look for those keywords and use them. But you should also look at other papers as well and see papers that are similar to yours to see what keywords people are using. What advice do you have for someone who does not have research experience? Get research experience. I mean, if you're interested in research, you should start reading papers and start thinking about what kinds of questions you're interested in. I find research very interesting. I started doing research in undergraduate and have been doing research ever since. So it was something that I found a mentor who was looking for a student who wanted to work on a summer project, and then I started working on that, and then eventually started asking my own questions. But there are people out there who have questions and are looking for people to work with them on projects. So you should search online and see who might be looking. Do I have to include all the information in the method and material section? What about patency? You don't have to include all the information in your methods and materials section if it's not relevant for the paper. So you should include all the information that someone needs to reproduce your paper. That should be your goal. So if the information is not needed for someone to reproduce the paper, then it does not need to be included. In the context of research, what do we call plagiarism? Plagiarism is when you copy someone else's idea without giving them credit. So if you read someone's paper and then it references that idea in your paper, but you don't give them credit for it, that's plagiarism. What is the maximum number of words for an abstract? So that depends on the journal or the conference that you're trying to submit to. Different people have different limits on how many words you should include in your abstract. So in the last, you use APA Harvard. How do you use APA Harvard to reference multiple reference with some conclusion like you did in the previous? What percentage of plagiarism is allowed? 0% of plagiarism is allowed. Sorry, I just got, I really don't like plagiarism. And a lot of people, plagiarism can destroy your field. You can destroy your academic career completely. So it's something that you have to avoid. So for references, back to the reference question. So someone was asking, how do you use APA Harvard reference? So what I do, I use what is called Zotero. I would say check it out. It's Z-O-T. Let me type in the chat. So it's Zotero. And I import reference format from Zotero, and so it automatically formats references for me. I don't have to manually edit anything. So if I want to use Harvard style, I would download the Harvard citation style from Zotero. And so when I set that in Word, I just have to put in that reference and it would format it in the right way. How do you know someone has not written a paper on the exact topic you want to write on? Yeah, you check the internet. You search and search and search and see if someone else has written it. Which reference method is highly preferred? I don't think there's any preference for a reference method. Again, it depends on your avenue. What do you mean by stepwise approach? Stepwise approaches basically means that at every step you're making a decision about how to move to the next step. So if it's selecting variables to include in your model, you might say, I want to include one variable based on correlation, and then decide what does the model look like based on that one variable, and then add another one, and then reevaluate the model fit, and then add another one and reevaluate the model fit, and so forth. Can you refer to the reader so directly, like note that there, or it should be noted that? Yes, you can definitely do that. So if there are certain things that you want your readers to pay attention to, you should state that. Can we get the slide of the record? I can't answer that, but I think those will be available. Is there any specific rule for labeling tables and figures? This also differs by journals, but usually you need to at least have a caption or a label underneath the table or the figure. How can one easily discuss without reiterating the result? So what I meant is that don't copy and paste what you've already said in the results. Just summarize it. You can just say, we noted the following, 1, 2, 3, 4, without copying exactly everything that you've already written in the result. Is there any rule for selection of keywords? There are no rules, but the keywords should reflect what your study is about. What are the main, so think about when you go to search for a paper, what are the keywords that you include in Google to find that paper? Those should be the same keywords that should be appearing in your paper, if your paper is the same as whatever you're looking for. How you write your abstract depends on the journal. Someone is asking whether you can write your abstracts in italics or italics. When should I use a case studies in research, and should I do my own case study, or can I use one that is already done? So there's some papers that are actually case studies. And I don't know when you should use one actually. It depends on what your research is about and what the case study is supposed to be about. How do we cite references without seeming like you copied word for word? That's where paraphrasing comes in. So the first step, you should definitely go to the Red blog and read the article that is there. We talk about plagiarism and how to avoid plagiarism. So I would say read that article. But one of the main things is to understand the article enough such that you can write it in your own words. What is the rule about paragraphing an abstract? So again, that differs for different places. So it depends. Some places would say they want you to have subheadings in your abstract. Some would say just write everything without subheadings. Can I make recommendations at the end of my conclusion? Yeah, you can do that. It depends on the journal. If the journal does not object to that, then you can definitely do that. Can I replicate another case study but use a different model or theory? Yes, you can, but you have to justify why you need a different model or a different theory. What happens if there is no institutional review board in place to formally grant approval, especially when it involves using human subjects? I think then you have to take some of that responsibility in making that decision. You have to think about the ethics of your study, how is it going to affect the people that you're studying, what is potential downstream effects. And you should also reach out to other people in the field. Like if you're working in Nigeria, for example, you don't only have to talk to people who are in Nigeria, you can talk to people in other places in the world, on other African countries who have done similar work, to see if the the study you're proposing is okay, or if they see any issues in what you're trying to do. How do you manage your reading? Papers in journals. That's a big question, but I basically follow the principles that I mentioned. I read. If I read something, I make a note of it. I highlight stuff. I write things down so I remember what I just read. Based on your second paper reviewed this evening, is it acceptable for citations to be length? CDC estimates of foodborne illness in the US. I'm not sure I completely understand that. From your experience, writing a paper should take typically how many days? That's a good one. I have papers that have taken 3 years to write. I have papers that have taken 6 weeks to write. It depends on whether you've already done the analysis. So if you've already done the analysis, then there's no reason why, there's no prescribed length of time. It all depends on the individual and the subject. So the analysis that have taken me years to do, either because the data is not available or the methods are not sufficient. So we keep developing new methods that we think will work better. And so it takes time, but it depends on you and how you write. Must an abstract be a single page? Again, depends on where the abstract is going. Different people have different guidelines. I think I've come across half abstracts with subheadings. Is this cool? That depends. Always depends on where it's going and whether it's a journal or it's a conference and what the guidelines are. During references, for example, Elaine et al. 2020, is it compulsory that be italicized? No, it doesn't have to be italicized, and you should definitely look at the referencing format that you're using. Should your research paper include more of technical terms or simpler words? It depends on how you're trying to communicate, but I would say simpler words so people can understand what you're trying to say. And you should use technical terms only when you need to use them. But your goal is always to communicate. So if you think using technical terms would work for your audience, then you should be using that. If I decide to validate some of the models you discuss in your works, would that be a good research? Reproducing my work, yes. Publishing that, like if you reproduce what I have done and it's exactly what I have done, most journals will not publish it unless if you're adding something new to it. What are examples of journals that don't allow citations? I don't think there are any journals that don't allow citations. Can we have access to this workshop material? I think so. How does anti-plagiarism software work? How do we best avoid it? I think you should be using anti-plagiarism software instead of avoiding it. The goal is not to plagiarize. So whatever you do, don't copy someone else's work without giving them credit for it. How do we get, okay, someone asked about informed consent. I've answered that question partially. So talk to other people who are doing similar research in other parts of the world if it's not available where you are. Someone asked me about results. I've answered that question as well. Can you give us a good site? Wait, I missed something. Can I decide to rewrite existing research that has been written so as to help and develop myself? You can do it for yourself, but if you're doing exactly what someone else has already done, you most likely will not get published. Calculation methods are included in which part of a research paper, methods or when writing the results? I don't know what calculation methods are or what you're referring to, but any method should be included in the methods section. Given a limited period of 3 months to do a dissertation, what research methodology would you advise for a topic in IT system? I have no idea. I am not in IT systems, so I don't know. While writing the project paper, what should be the maximum pages for literature review? Oh, that depends on the length of the overall paper. Your literature review can be as short as a couple of paragraphs, but it could also be a few pages as well. Should I keep going with questions?
Well, thanks so much, Elaine. I think you've answered most of the questions. Of course, there will be continuous engagement. So I want to say on behalf of Data Science Nigeria, we want to say a very big thank you to you for sharing your 2 days with us, pouring knowledge in a very unrestricted way. Thank you so much for all that you do. So please, everyone in this chat room, I want to encourage you to help us to celebrate Elaine. I've provided our Twitter page. I've also provided Data Science Nigeria Twitter page. Please help us to say a big thank you to her for doing this so graciously. She does this so passionately. These are things she just give back in an amazing way. Interestingly, she was actually meant to be in Nigeria physically for 2 weeks in the month of May. That was our plan last year. We were meant to go to 4 cities. We were meant to be in Lagos, in Ibadan, in Zaria, and in Owerri to run this session 3 days each for 12 days in all the cities. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has played a big role on us, but I'm sure as soon as all this settled down, Elaine will be very gracious to be back in Lagos to support us with this. Especially, thank you very much, Elaine, thank you. Especially because as Data Science Nigeria, we have a very strong focus on research upskilling our research outcomes and capability. We're going to be focusing a lot on MSc and PhD students as we build AI Plus Researchers Network, where we allow students to be able to get supported via international expertise and also build a community of people within Nigeria who are working on a lot of research. Of course, let you know how that progresses, but I will encourage you, follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, on all social, on YouTube. Like these lectures will be available from Monday on our YouTube page. So just go to our Twitter and the links will be there to view today's class and yesterday's class, okay? Just to let you know, next week, as you know, Data Science Nigeria has been very busy throughout this COVID-19. A great kudos to the team at Data Science Nigeria. All the staff are working remotely and they are doing amazing work. We're so proud of all of you. Thanks so much for all that you do. Our various communities are having classes on various campuses. They are all running online. University of Lagos class started on Monday. It continues till Saturday 30th, so you can join this class. It's purely for beginners, how to get started in machine learning. Next week, Friday, we are hosting Dr. Stephen Odaibo in Deep Learning 101 for students and professionals. All these are free classes like the session that Elaine just graciously did for us. So don't miss this class. Register and we're going to send you the link. It's Friday, 29th May, 5 to 7 GMT +1, that's Nigerian time. And then we are starting Ladies on Thursday next week. That is a special community created to support ladies, female professionals and students to network, share best practices, and get mentored by leading professionals in Nigeria with solid industry and academic experience. And like I said, we've got data grant for 50 qualified attendees who of course must be ladies. So the campaign will start from tomorrow, Saturday. Register and you may qualify to get gigabytes of data to join this mentoring class. These are practicing data scientists from banks, from software development, telecoms company, and consulting firms. So they'll be sharing their life experiences with us, how to build your career. So don't miss this opportunity. Of course, AI Hub is closed, but Data Science Nigeria is operating full time. So all our guys are available. Just take a screenshot of all these numbers. You can reach out to all the staff in Data Science Nigeria based on your requirement. Is it business need, research need, consulting need, data cloud, paid training, AI Plus membership, book sales, or recruitment as a service? They are all available to support you in everywhere. And of course, our beginners AI book is now available globally. You can buy it on Jumia, Amazon, Kindle, paperback, iBook, Apple, Google Play, You can buy it and you can gift it out. Next week is Children's Day, so this should be the best gift you can give your child to celebrate Children's Day on May 27th. And of course, you can download the annual report to understand what we do, our principles, our governance, and the way of work. So let's win some data. Are you ready? We're winning 2 gigabytes of free internet data for yourself, or you can gift it to somebody else. I will be more excited if you give it to somebody else. Okay, so let's go. Question 1. Question 1. So it's fastest fingers. Fastest fingers. Okay. I think we are okay. I think we can close it now. So we'll move to the next one. We're closing it now. We're moving to the next one. Thanks, Leko. Close. So next question. So the answer is critical thinking. Next question. How much do you know about our speaker today? Wow, someone said Tanzania. Interesting. South Africa. Wow.
Close.
US. Good. Okay. Okay, I think we can close it now.
Yeah, closed.
Yeah, so Dr. Elaine Nsoesie was born and raised in Cameroon, but schooled in the United States of America. Okay, someone actually said Nigeria, so we have claimed her. And I like that. Next question. You must overstate and emphasize ordinary statistical methods in your method. This is true or false? I think we can close it now. Okay, close. It's closed now. So next, the answer is false. Next, on the Yelp case study that was given to us, we're talking about how the bias was addressed by based on the large number of negative reviews. They compared the median in the data set using network analysis and visualization. True or false? True or false? Okay, closed. I think we can close it now. Okay, next question is actually true. So next question, the purpose of dash and dash is to provide enough details that a competent worker can repeat the experiment. We spoke a lot about the reproducibility of your research work. What are those two things? Okay, I think we can close it now. Let's close it now. Let's close it now. Close, close, close. Okay, thank you. Next, so these are the answer materials and method. Next, dash should include the following. Describe the main objective of the study. Explain why the study was done. Briefly state the methods without including too much details. Summarize the most important result and their significance. Okay, I think we can close this. There are too many right answers. So let's close this. Close. Question, the answer is abstract. Then the last question for today. The following are the rules of dash section of a research paper. Don't be shy. Do not reiterate the result. Point out the exceptions in your finding. Show how your result agree or disagree with previous findings. Clearly state your conclusions. Okay, I think we can close that also. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. It's discussion. I think we have two more. Okay, true or false, you should present all the experiments you conducted in your results. Okay, we can close this. Let's close it. Let's close it. Let's close it. Okay. Okay, that's that. Thank you so much. So we're going to announce the winners. Later will announce the winners. But whilst we are arranging to announce the winners, it's very important for you to be aware that we provide, whilst a lot of things are done free of charge, while a lot of things are done free of charge, Data Science Nigeria, the only mechanism of funding what we do is to ensure that we also run professional training for companies. For leading companies in Nigeria, we run professional trainings, which allow us to raise some money to fund all the free trainings, to support all our 40 communities in cities and campuses, to sponsor research, to fund PhD projects, to send a lot of our community members to international conferences. This is how we raise money. And of course, we also offer consulting services. We're providing massive consulting services for a lot of companies who have got data. And of course, we provide data and equipment as a service. So just watch this video to tell you what we do for industries in terms of professional training. So if you've got an uncle, you've got a brother that is looking for a company to help them train their staff, we'll be glad to do that for them. So I'll play it. And after that, Lincoln will take over to announce the winner and close the session.
Okay, so I chose data science because, I mean, it's the future.
The vision of DSN, I identify with it. I mean, it's something I can relate with, the vision of wanting to create a hub for data scientists in West Africa. I mean, it's something that is highly needed.
Okay, so far so good. It has been a wonderful one. I was able to learn the use of data to interpret data, to predict the future, definitely.
My big take home is probably sentiment analysis and then the use of big ML.
Today we did data visualization, dealt extensively with Power BI. There's a whole lot I can do with it. Things that we've been trying to analyze, I can now visualize it and it will make more sense to my audience.
Big ML majorly, it has been my own major takeaway, and the lectures were so broken down such that anybody can understand it.
What Sharon told me is lesser than what I even experienced there. The facilitators, they took us like children. It was like a dummy taking the course.
Tell everybody I come in contact with, especially young people in school right now, jobs as we know it will no longer exist. So you should get trained, in one of the technical skills. Could be data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence. That is the future.
So for me, DSN, the vision, is something that every forward-looking Nigerian should identify with.
Thank you very much. We're still collating the winners. Just give us another few minutes so that we're able to announce the winners before we leave today.
Okay, so I chose data science because, I mean, it's the future. And then, of course, when you look at the way that the world of work is evolving with the statistics, I mean, we have several statistics, one of which I saw recently saying that 47% of jobs as we know it today will evolve or no longer exist. So it's just only natural that you evolve and acquire skills that are in time with, the time, and then, of course, what the future prescribes. I came in contact with Data Science Nigeria for the first time. I think your very first boot camp. I was supporting a client at the very first boot camp that I held in Lagos. And since then, Data Science Nigeria has pretty much been on my radar. I've been keeping tabs on the company, And then a few times, I think after that event, I Googled Data Science Nigeria, and I saw a number of the trainings that you had planned out, and it looked quite interesting. My very first class, of course, we learned about the types of data, and then by the second class, what I really like about the class is the fact that it's very hands-on. So now, I mean, when someone comes and says big ML, I'm like looking at you like, oh, I know what that is, With big ML, we're able to evaluate models, and then went on to the next class, which we had to use text mining tool, which was Orange. Tell everybody I come in contact with, especially young people in school right now. Jobs as we know it will no longer exist, so you should get trained in one of the technical skills. It could be data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence. That is the future. And of course, you have to take the Data Science Nigeria. Now, here's why. One, I see that there's a whole lot of, first off, the vision to get 1 million people, 1 million AI talent out of Nigeria. I think it's very laudable personally. I'm quite aligned with that vision. I think it's a good one. And then I can tell you for free that the training that you get is actually relatable. You can use it from the get-go. It's not all theory. And that's exactly what you have here. So I highly recommend Data Science Nigeria for your data science or AI or machine learning or any other fourth industrial revolution skills.
So thanks so much, everyone. It's been a great event. So Oleko, our technical lead, will update us on who qualified for the data grants today, for the activity level and for answering the questions. So once again, thanks so much for being part of this. So Oleko, please, can you just let us know the winner as we round off the session for today?
Okay, just about to share my screen very quickly. All right, thank you very much. So the first question, the winner is Ifeanyi Chimboyin. Apologies if I didn't pronounce the name well. Second question, Abdullahi Kawu. Third, Abimbola /AB107. Number 4, Isitua Michael. The fifth question, that's Roland AB/139. Number 6, Nehemiah. Number 7, Emosibe Miracle. Apologies if I didn't pronounce the name well. Number 8, AB/011. And then number 9, Felix Uche. So please, if I've announced your name, kindly send a mail to Olalekon at datasciencenigeria.ai. datasciencenigeria.ai. I've dropped the email on the chat section. Olalekon at datasciencenigeria.ai. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for coming. So remember to send a mail to claim your prizes. All right, so we've come to the end of today's session. Thank you very much for coming around. I mean, just ensure to stay close to us. We are available on all social media platforms, on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Instagram. And then, of course, you can check Data Science Nigeria out on YouTube. We have an active YouTube channel. All right. Thank you very much. Do have a lovely evening.
We have 10 international experts who have flown in to teach you, and then we have about 7 that are dialing. And out of business leaders in Nigeria, we have another 8 business leaders in banks, in telecoms, in consulting that will also come so that you have a broad view. But in addition to that, I have some good news. First, some internship. In addition to that, there will be no competition at the boot camp. Microsoft is supporting this way. The first position gets $1,000 US, second position $750 US, third position $500 US.
I started Python around 2016 or 2017, and actually at first I was confused because I didn't know what to use Python for.